This video will cover fungi. We will look at 3 of the major phyla of fungi, the Zygomycota, Ascomycota, and Basidiomycota. One of the key ways to differentiate types of fungi is looking at their fruiting bodies, which they use to reproduce. Remember, all fungi reproduce using spores. With the Zygomycota, we start with 2 fungi that are going to reproduce. The hyphae will start to grow together. Remember, we don't have girl fungi and boy fungi, so instead we're going to label these fungi plus and minus. When these hyphae meet and fuse, they will form a zygote. The thick, spiky zygospore will then mature and grow a sporangium. Inside of the sporangium, we will see the spores forming. Okay? When mature, that sporangium will burst open, spewing spores all through the environment. A great example of Zygomycota are the rhizopus. Rhizopus includes things like bread molds. So every time you open your bread and there's that green, fluffy mess growing on the loaf, that's actually a fungus called rhizopus. And on that fungi, you're going to see these little sporangia sprouting if you give it enough time. Here are a few examples of some Zygomycota growing on a loaf of bread. The second type of fungi I will discuss are the Ascomycota. These reproduce using an ascocarp. These fungi are also known as sac and club fungi. Ascomycota get their name from their cup-like ascocarp. The ascocarp will have the cup on top held up by a stalk. The spores of this particular type of fungi are produced inside the cup. The Pizziza slides that you looked at had a cross-section of one of these cups. Inside of that cross-section, you should have seen a lower area with hyphae, and then small finger-like protrusions sticking up with 4 little dots in each one. Those little dots are the actual spores being produced on the inside of the cup. These are some examples of the ascocarps of these Ascomycota. Note the cup-like shape held up by a stalk. Ascomycota also includes groups like yeast, Dutch elm disease, and the zombie fungus cordyceps. The last type of fungi we will investigate is Basidiomycota. These are also known as the club fungi and is the largest phylum of fungi in the fungi kingdom. This group reproduces using a basidiocarp. Most of these basidiocarps are your typical mushroom. So you will see the cap on top with a stalk holding it up. Underneath the cap, there are gills. If you look at the gills under the microscope, you will see the spores being formed. Here's an example of a typical Basidiomycota. Notice the gills on the underside of the cap. Basidiomycota also includes things like the shelf fungi, which have a modified stalk and they grow on the sides of trees. This group also includes puffballs, which are very common around Raleigh, but are an atypical type of mushroom. The last idea I'm going to cover with fungi are the lichens. Lichens are a mutualistic symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an algae cell. These guys are fantastic colonizers. Because the algae are able to photosynthesize, they create sugars that they share with the fungi. The fungi are very good at breaking down elements in the ecosystem. They can break down dead and decaying wood, materials out of the soil, or even rock. Because of this, these lichens are great at getting into new places like bare rock and breaking down the rock to turn it into substrate for other organisms. There are 3 major forms of lichen that you need to recognize. The first is the crustaceous lichen. This form of lichen looks kind of like crusty paint on a rock or branch. Here's another example on a tree. These crustaceous lichens are very common. Foliose lichens look kind of like foil attached to a branch or rock. These are a three-dimensional type organism that looks like it could be peeled off of the rock. Note that this particular branch has both the foliose lichen and a crustaceous lichen down here. Here's another example of a foliose lichen. The third form of lichen is a fruticose lichen. These lichens look like little shrubs growing on top of a branch or rock. Fruticose lichens can also be free living on the soil. So, we've now looked at the three major types of fungi: Zygomycota, Basidiomycota, and Ascomycota. We've also discussed the lichens. There are more types of fungi out there. These are just the major ones that we have in our collection.